Good morning, everybody. How are you today? I have my friend Pippa. Hey, Pips. Yeah, she was outside with me today. Yeah, so she might sit here. Nope, she's gone. All right, guys, here we go. Chapter 7. Mrs. Lilly is silly. Andrea goes crazy. When Mrs. Lilly told me I was a natural reporter, Andrea's face got all red. I don't think a grown-up ever said that another kid was better than her at anything, ever. It was like Andrea looked like she wanted to yell and scream at Mrs. Lilly. But of course, Little Miss Perfect would never say anything mean to a grown-up. So Andrea just stood there with her eyes bugging out of her head. I thought she was going to explode. It was the greatest moment of my life. Now go out there and dig up some more dirt, said Miss Lilly. We only have a half hour left. Andrea and I went out into the hallway again. She was all mad, stomping around and making her best mean faces at me. Anything you can do, I can do better, she said. I'll show you who's a natural reporter. Sheesh, I said, take a chill pill. We wandered around the hallways for a while until we saw Mrs. Yonkers in the computer room. She was by herself, so it must have been her free period. Andrea marched over to Mrs. Yonkers and asked her to tell us the most exciting thing that had ever happened to her. Oh, I'm not a very exciting person, she said. I'm sorry to say. I take my son to swimming practice. I go to grocery stores. And on the weekend, we have barbecues in our backyard. You say you have barbecues in your backyard? Asked Andrea, writing down every word. Sure, almost every week. It's fun. Great, Andrea said. Let's go, Arlo. Having a barbecue in the backyard didn't sound like much of a scoop to me, but when we went out into the hallway, she wrote this in her notebook. Mrs. Yonkers sets fires for fun. She doesn't set fires for fun, I told Andrea. Well, that's what she said. Andrea insisted. I have it right here in my notes. You're not the only natural reporter around here, Arlo. I can dig up the dirt, too. This is a great human interest story. Ugh, whatever, I said. We saw our vice principal, Mrs. Jaffe, coming down the hall, and Andrea ran over to her. We're writing articles for the paper. Mrs. Jaffe, what's the worst thing that's ever happened to you? I had a sad childhood. My family was very poor. There were even rats in our house. It was so bad we had to use poison to get rid of them. Great, said Andrea, writing in her notebook. With Mrs. Jaffe left, I looked at what Andrea had written. Vice principal lived with rats. But then she crossed out that with her pencil. I have a better idea, she said. And then she wrote this. Vice principal poisoned defenseless animals. Andrea had this wild look in her eyes, like crazy people do in the movies. It was pretty scary. That's when the school security guard, Officer Spence, came over. Are you kids supposed to be roaming around in the halls? He asked us. Sure, I told him. We're writing articles for the newspaper. Yes, said Andrea. Security guards must lead very dangerous lives. Can you tell us about a time you beat up a bad guy or something exciting like that? No, I never beat up any bad guys, said Officer Spence. But before I got this job, I was a security guard in a prison. That wasn't much fun. How long did you work there? I asked. Oh, about 5 years. Andrea got that crazy look in her eyes again while she was writing notes. It was almost like the time I hypnotized her and she climbed up on the roof. When Officer Spence walked away, she showed me what she had written. Officer Spence was in jail for 5 years. He was not, I told Andrea. He was too, she insisted. I have it right here in my notes. We went back and forth like that for a while. She was getting out of control. After that, she marched up to interview Mrs. Coco, our gifted and talented teacher. Mrs. Coco told us that her car broke down the other day and she had to use somebody else's car to get to school. So Andrea wrote this in her notebook. Miss Coco is a car thief. Then we went over to the office to interview Mrs. Patty, the school secretary. She told us a really sad story about the time her dog died in an accident when she was a little kid. But this is what Andrea wrote in her notebook. Mrs. Patty, dog killer. I slapped my head. I was a little worried about all the dirt Andrea was digging up. I'm not sure we should put those articles in the paper, I said to her, as we walked back to our class. We might get in big trouble. Oh, take a chill pill, Arlo. Mrs. Lilly told us to dig up the dirt. I'm just doing what she told us to do. Andrea always does what grown-ups tell her to do. A grown-up could tell her to jump off a bridge, and Andrea would do it. What is her problem? We should probably interview Mr. Granite, I suggested. After all, he is our teacher. We don't need to interview Mr. Granite, Andrea said. I know exactly what to write about him. So she wrote this in her notebook. Third grade teacher is an illegal alien. Well, at least that one part was true. Mr. Granite is from another planet. Chapter 8, Front Page News. I'll see you in a minute.